Now that we've added a title block to our layout, we're ready to create a viewport such that we can see our part and set it to a measurable scale. Now you may be asking yourself, where is our part drawing in relation to this Layout tab? Let's take a look. I'm going to come down to the lower left and click on the Model tab. This will return us to Model Space, where our part geometry is located. Model Space is where we do all of our drafting. Conversely, let me select Layout 1. Layouts represent our sheet of paper, and layouts are where we insert our title block. The layouts sit on top of Model Space. So if I want to see my part, I need to cut a hole in this piece of paper. Now AutoCAD calls this hole a viewport. And if we want to create a viewport in our drawing, we need to place it on a layer of its own. Take a look at my layer control. Notice I'm practicing good form. I've already created a viewport layer, and that layer is current. To create my viewport, I'm going to go to the View tab on my ribbon, and the tool we want is located in the Viewports panel. Now, launching this command is essentially 3 clicks. I'm going to click New, then Single, and then OK. Now I will pick 2 points to define the rectangular shape of my viewport. I'm going to select the end point here, and then I'll come down and select the end point over here. Notice I can now see my part through this viewport. A viewport is a lot like a window into Model Space. Watch this. If my cursor is inside the viewport and I double-click, AutoCAD gives me access to Model Space. From here, I can pan and zoom, and I can work through this viewport. It's kind of like reaching your hand through a window. In fact, we'll set the scale of this geometry by adjusting our zoom factor. Now, we're not going to be doing that manually. Instead, once we're in the viewport, we're going to come down to the Viewport Scale menu and click, and I can set my scale here. Notice at the top of the menu I have several standard engineering and mechanical scales, and at the bottom I have my standard architectural scales. Let's see if this drawing will fit in my viewport at a scale of 1:1. That's actually very close. Let me click and hold my wheel, and I will pan this down and center it a little bit better. Once you set the scale of your viewport, it's a good idea to come down and click this icon to lock it. Otherwise, notice mine's not locked yet. If you're working in the viewport and you pan and zoom, you just trashed your scale. Now you might think you could adjust your wheel and straighten this out, but that won't work. The only way to correct your scale is to go back to the Viewport Scale menu and reselect it from the list. Once again, I'm going to center this a little bit better. And when I'm finished, I will lock this. Now, even if I'm working in this viewport, if I pan or zoom, AutoCAD will pan and zoom the entire layout. To get out of my viewport, I will place my cursor outside the viewport boundary and double-click. Now my cursor is back on the Layout tab, and I have access to all of my layout objects. Now you may be wondering, why do we put these viewports on a layer of their own? That's a good question. Let me deselect this. I'm going to go to the Home tab. We put them on their own layer because if we turn this layer off, the rectangle goes away, and now I don't have to worry about it showing up on my plots. Let's look at something else. I'm going to right-click on my Layout tab and select Page Setup Manager. We'll click Modify, and we've already taken care of these settings earlier. Let's take a look at our pens. I'm going to click my pen flyout and select Monochrome Pens. Notice, since I'm using a layout, I also have a checkbox that will allow me to display my plot styles. Let's click OK, and I'll click Close. Notice that my geometry is now displaying as monochrome. We can take it one step further. Let's come down to the status bar and we'll look at another mode setting. This icon toggles the display of my line weights. If I click this to turn it on, I can now see my line weights on screen as well. Now when I work on my layout, it's just like I'm working in a plot preview mode. One thing I do want to mention about this toggle, if we go back to Model Space, notice the pen weights also show up here. And they always stay the same width on screen, so as I back up, they tend to look fatter and fatter and fatter. If you find this to be annoying, you can always come down and turn it off. The pen weights will plot just fine whether this toggle is turned on or not. I'm going to leave mine on. We'll go back to our Layout tab. Let's do one more thing before we plot this. Let's rename this layout. Layout 1 is kind of generic. I'm going to double-click on the Layout tab, And I'm going to call this Final Design. When the time comes to plot this layout, remember I've already set all of my plot settings ahead of time. All I have to do to send this to the printer is click Plot and OK. And since my layout is set to plot to the Adobe PDF plotter, I will give my PDF a name, and I'll click Save. On my screen is an example of my finished plot. Layouts are the most powerful way of creating plots in AutoCAD. Their benefits even go beyond the viewports, plot preview, and naming features that we've seen here. If we can incorporate layouts into our workflow, we've taken the first step towards using even more powerful features like sheet sets, page setups, and publishing.